What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Sports Weekly Podcast, where we talk everything Iowa State. I'm your host, Christian Royston, joined by my co-host, Logan Shanks. We're going to start by going over the Kansas game and then previewing BYU, as the season is almost wrapped up. Just 3 more games. Iowa State still needs 1 more win to get into bowl game eligibility. So, first of all, Kansas, close game at the end there, 28-21. So, I mean, I feel like there was a good amount of stuff that went right, but it seemed like it was a little too late there.
Yeah, and I mean, Christian, how many times have we talked about letting mistakes really just kill you in the end? I mean, we'll get all into it, but, things that pop off the top of my head, Rocco Beck pick 6 in the first half, and then you make it a 3-point game, and then you give up an 80-yard touchdown because you're just
on one play.
You don't let your defenders get set. You're not calling the right play, whatever the case may be. But you let those. I think those are the 2 biggest mistakes, and that's one on the offensive side, one on the defensive side. So I think it's a game where you can't blame just one side. I mean, the offense didn't wake up in the first half, but the defense did the best that they could, holding Kansas to just 14 points and really just 7 points in the first half. Yeah,
I mean, I guess they made the game winnable to start. But it kind of seemed like the offense wasn't really moving. Like they weren't getting downs. They weren't moving the chains at all. It kind of felt, I don't know if it was something with like a lack of creativity there to start, because it did seem that Shieldhouse was calling kind of some like not great plays. Yeah, just conservative plays at the beginning of drives, which, ate up like quite a bit of downs early. And it put Becht in a kind of a tough situation on a lot of 3rd and long situations where it's like, those aren't ideal, especially if you aren't moving the offense well. And it definitely did impact them early on.
Yeah, and I mean, Kansas's defense isn't really that great. I mean, to be honest with you, like, they get that pick 6. They forced Iowa State to, I want to say it was, let's see, under, just 121 yards in that first half. So, they're good, but they're not great. Iowa State's definitely been up against better defenses.
Yeah, that's true.
For Nate Shieldhouse and Matt Campbell to call a pretty conservative game in the first half was surprising to me. I feel like it was one of those things where they just keep trying to get that running game going. And when you only got 3 games left in the season, so you can't really make a huge turnaround. But I think there's been a lot of moments in the season where if you just cut it, you cut the run game, early on, you're just like, all right, it's not going to work. We need to stop trying to, run, pass, punt, whatever the case may be on every down or on every possession. You just got to have more inventive and just kind of different play calling, because it's almost starting to look more like Tom Manning's play calling from the last couple seasons.
That's true, especially with the run game. I mean, we saw there was like some, like sneaky plays there. I like the Jalen Knoll pass to Higgins. But I want to see like more of those where Shieldhouse is kind of going outside the box, getting creative, as opposed to just these short little runs or, Cartavius Norton up the middle, just with nothing to work with.
Right. And I think the run game, especially from the offensive line perspective, took a major step back in this game. It seemed like the offensive line was playing the way that they had been in the first couple games of the season, where it was the biggest problem was, Iowa State starts this season, 1-2, and it seems like a big problem there was that the offensive line could not get the run game going. And I just think they kind of reverted back to that. And I know Kansas has a pretty good run defense. That was probably their best aspect defensively. But to not get really anything going, again, I'm looking back at that first half. Iowa State is probably one of the better defense, is probably still like top 3 defense in the Big 12. They hold Kansas to 30 rushing yards, but to only outgain them by 2 yards rushing in the first half, I mean, it was really surprising to me to see the offensive line take a big jump back like that.
And talking about the offensive line, I feel like they also put Rocco Becht in quite a few situations where he's scrambling around in the pocket or taking hits as he throws. Like it did seem like maybe this Kansas pass rush and maybe just the Kansas like front 4 there were just kind of eating away at the offensive line the entire day. I don't know. I mean, you have the numbers. How many sacks did
2 sacks.
2 sacks on the
you
day.
You got one, just one solo sack and then a combo sack there. So,
Yeah.
or a
And
split sack, whatever the case may be. But
And it definitely like seemed like, especially just because like this line hasn't really given up that many sacks all year, and for the game to be where, you know, like the run game struggles because the offensive line can't create holes, and Beck can't get the passing game started early on because he's taking hits, taking sacks. So it did seem like they were almost scrambling against the just Kansas defenders there.
Yeah, and you see that especially like in the receiving numbers, because there wasn't really. I mean, I think Beck did a good job of spreading the ball out, but it's almost like he was forced to spread the ball out because he really couldn't find one target, you know, to focus on. There wasn't really one single guy that was kind of tearing apart the secondary or, you know, having a really good day. I mean, we'll get onto him more later, but, you know, Dimitri Stanley and Jalen Knoll both have 5 catches. Yeah. You know, that was the 2 better receivers, but each of them only, I mean, they aren't even getting 60 yards each.
Like no receivers getting over 60 that game, which is kind of weird almost.
Because like I said, I mean, that Kansas secondary isn't exactly the greatest. I mean, they've been giving up like 30 points a game before Iowa State, you know, for the last, you know, 2 or 3 games. I can't remember what it was, but yeah, I think just really missing the mark offensively and not really taking advantage of an opportunity, especially, I keep saying it, but earlier in that first half, you don't really get the passing game going until, I mean, halfway through the third quarter when, as you mentioned, it's little too late, especially when your drives are going over that 8-minute mark.
Yeah, and you can't really expect the defense to lock down every single drive. And, you know, obviously you don't want them to give up an 80-yard touchdown on one play, but Kansas was bound to get a score at some point, and you know, for Iowa State to just expect to come back from down 18 just with no like struggles at all from Kansas was just like maybe too hopeful for them.
Yeah, and I mean, I went a little overboard on the 8-minute mark for the drives, but I mean, you know, when you have that first touchdown drive in the third quarter, that was close to 6 minutes, and then another one at the end, which made it a 3-point game, that was almost 7 minutes. You're taking
that's a quarter.
Yeah, you're taking a whole quarter off the clock for 2 touchdown drives. I mean, that's good. You know,
you're getting touchdowns.
You're getting touchdowns, but when you're playing from behind, and I have talked about this a little bit, but when Matt Campbell plays from behind, it doesn't matter if it's at home or away. It's just, I mean, no team. I actually was listening to a podcast that, you know, made a good point. Like, no team's built to win from behind, like come from behind.
Yeah.
But you should have, you know, good enough coaching and good enough players to know that like you can win from behind. And it does. I feel like it hasn't mattered whether you have Brock Purdy and Breece Hall in the backfield or Rocco Becht and Eli Sanders. Matt Campbell just has not been great when, you know, trying to play from behind, especially early on.
Yeah, and it does kind of come down to just time management. We saw it. I think we saw it against Iowa too. Like, just they need to know that I guess they don't have a ton of time to be scoring these points, and they do. Like, they have a pretty good, you know, hurry up offense.
Yeah.
I mean, we saw it at the end of the first half there. They had like 2 minutes left, and they went down there and almost got a touchdown. But you want to see them do that offense all the time when you're down 18, because you need quick scores to make up those points, and especially to give your defense a little bit of breathing room, because it definitely seemed like the defense was not really ready to just hold Kansas to no points in the second half, because they had obviously not done that in the first half.
Right. And whenever they're playing, I mean, those long drives, you kind of want to see those long drives come early on. It seems like the game is almost flipped. You start out with, you know, I mean, you see it in a lot of college games where you want to get those long drives and take a lot of time off in that first quarter. If you can end the first quarter up 7-0, I mean, that's great. But, and you mentioned it, they can do a hurry up offense. You've seen it. Like, I think Rocco, that's actually when he looks really good, is when they're playing the hurry up. And we were talking about it in the booth, like, why are they not doing this like more early on? I know you kind of want to slow the offense down early on, and you know, it almost seems like Matt Campbell in a lot of these games wants to get a quick scoring drive on one of their first possessions, but it just has not worked. And when they're playing from behind and they're taking all this time off, again, you don't have all the time in the world, especially when you're down. I mean, there was one point they were down 21-3.
Yeah,
I mean,
like right out of the half.
Yeah, because Kansas gets a touchdown drive or has a touchdown drive on their first possession. Yep. I mean, you just can't do that. You don't have all the time in the world to go out there and have these 6-minute drives.
Yeah. I also didn't notice that Kansas had a touchdown in every single quarter. Which, that is interesting.
Yeah.
I did like the choice to go for the 2-point there to start to half, just because, you know, you're down. If you kick that extra point, you're down by 11. You need 2 touchdowns. And obviously it worked. You know, they score the Sanders and then just whip Sanders around to the other side, and he gets that 2-point. And I think that was when Iowa State really turned it on. And I think if the second half Iowa State had played Kansas the whole game, they probably would have come out with at least a 1-score victory.
Right. And especially if you can, even if you have a drive like that at the end of the first half, and you can go in, you know, tie the game 14, you know, you don't have to get the 2-point there, but you get you run it down their throats and you get a touchdown, 10.5, that's great. But having that momentum not come really until the end of the third quarter, I think that really just, you know, deterred Iowa State from, you know, they get another touchdown to make it a 3-point game. But, I mean, you know, that the momentum swing came just a little too late for them. They kept their hopes alive, but ultimately, you know, just too much for them to come back when you're down 21-3.
Yeah, and I think that is like one thing that is a good takeaway from this game. The thing that went right was we saw the offense move pretty smoothly in that second half, which is promising, because that whole first half, especially the first quarter, we're like, I don't know where this offense went. This is kind of looking like the game against Ohio. Like, they could not get anything going.
Yeah.
But then second half, you're like, okay, this is the Iowa State that we've been seeing in the Big 12, which is good, just a good sign going forward. I think they just kind of got caught off guard by Kansas. Almost, maybe they just got wrapped up in the homecoming. Like, you know, maybe this is a game that we can win. We're favored, stuff like that.
Yeah.
But they just kind of looked off, especially with Beck's pick 6. I mean, that's one that I'll keep going back to, just because it wasn't even like necessarily like a misread. It was just almost like not even close. Like, like it was a play designed, like what Campbell said, it was a play designed where he is supposed to read that route. It's not like immediately designed to be thrown there. But then, you know, he leads Higgins by like at least a foot, like or a yard.
Yeah. And
you just can't have that, because obviously catches everybody off guard, and it's just an easy score for Kansas.
Yeah, and you call it an easy score. You think back, that was a 50-yard pick 6. I mean, I know. Looked like Jeremiah Cooper out there, which we haven't really talked about, was out of the game. He was in his street clothes on the sideline. And I think you wrote a piece about it. I think that really was a big thing from this defense, and we can get into that more. But just kind of ending it on the offense. I mean, just putting 0 points on the board and then turning things around, that's really good to see. Like you said, they're moving the ball consistently in the second half. But we get back to the problem of what we saw in the first half of the season of not playing complete games of football. You see good spots of playing, you know, good offense and whatnot, but the offense, you know, just really has only had a few games this season, and it's a young offense, new starters, whatnot. But when you're settling into the latter half of the season, you'd really want to see, you know, more games, kind of like the TCU game and the Cincinnati game. I think the Cincinnati game is probably the most complete game that they've played this whole season. But anyways, just to end it on the offense, when you have your first, 6 drives go punt, 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 pick 6, punt, and then downs to end the half.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just, it deters you from, you know, credit to them for bouncing back. But again, I just go back to that complimentary, complete game of football that they just have failed to do all season. But, if you want to talk about the defense, new starters in there, I mean, you certainly noticed that right off the jump in that first quarter.
Yeah, I did kind of rip into them a little too much, I want to say, but I just kind of want to keep them accountable because, I mean, this is a game where Iowa State, like especially Campbell knew afterwards that the turnover margin is important. It's always been important. Iowa State is like leading the Big 12 in, or was in interceptions before this game. So it's like, especially with Jason Bean coming in, throwing 2 picks in the last 2 games, like you just kind of want to see them get something going because the defense just thrives off turnovers, especially with Jeremiah Cooper, who leads or was like co-leading the nation before or I guess at the bye week.
I think now he is just tied for second. There's a guy from, I want to say it's like North Carolina, who's popping off. He has like 7 interceptions now.
Jesus.
If he wants to enter the transfer portal and come to Ames, Iowa, that would be
Put
great.
him alongside Jeremiah Cooper.
He's from Notre Dame, and he's actually solely in second with 5 interceptions, right? No, that can't be right. I'm looking at interceptions per game. Sorry, guys. But
which is still, I mean,
the
number 2 corner, or I guess safety,
right.
The number 2 defensive back in the nation when it comes to interceptions per game.
So
not having him in definitely was impactful, especially because, I mean, that's Blake Thompson's first start. That's Jontez Williams' first start, who Jontez Williams has been playing pretty complete ball. He's been solid throughout the year. I've seen him on the field a good amount of times where I'm like, he's making plays, but also there's been some times where I'm like, okay, it's a little shaky. And especially with them starting, you could tell that Bean was really favoring the receivers that were matching up against them.
Yeah, and I mean, credit to him, Jason Bean having another pretty good game with his arm, which
he's looking good.
Yeah, you wouldn't expect it going in this game. And I will give it to him again as well that last time he was here, he got embarrassed. I'll just put it like that. I think he threw 2 picks. He was scrambling all around. I remember just watching him like, look at this, I think he transferred from North Texas, coming into the Big 12, having to deal with this Iowa State defense, see you my senior year. And, well, here he is dicing up the secondary. And but, and I actually saw that, Jeremiah Cooper is tied for second in the nation with 5 picks on the season.
After taking a game off.
Yeah, I mean, that's just
crazy. That
is crazy. And you really hit it right there that, missing that big guy or that, big guy that gets you turnovers, and then having to sub in someone that, like you said, he's gotten some interceptions, he's made some good plays, but, I won't lie, every time I looked up and I'm like, oh, who gave up 30 yards? Oh, Blake Thompson. Yep, makes sense. Jontez Williams, right? But that's what you'll get from, young corners. I mean, it's definitely a learning curve. I'm not going to say that, giving up, they probably combined gave up over like 100 yards, probably maybe even close to 150 yards, but, it's not a good thing, but, you'll take it.
They definitely did get better later in the game.
Yeah.
I think there was one drive where I noticed Blake Thompson he gave up a pretty big play where he just wasn't on his man at all, and then had to chase him down to get the tackle. But then really clutched up later in that drive to get a pass defense, which forced them into a long field goal, which Kansas and field goals just don't mesh.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's and especially with Campbell and I talked to Bo Freeler too. They were both talking about, especially Blake Thompson, since this is his like first game starting and also like the first big role he's had. He did kind of, I guess, get comfortable later in the game, which was good to see, especially if Jeremiah's situation lingers, which at this point Campbell is like pretty confident that he's going to place, or he wants him to play Saturday against BYU. But he is still one of those like game time decisions.
Yeah.
So there's a good chance we don't see him against BYU, which would mean we'd see more Blake Thompson.
Yeah. And I mean, I think if you want to play it smart, if you're Matt Campbell, maybe don't have Jeremiah Cooper out there on a road game that starts at 9:15 Central Time. You know, you're going to have a lot of guys trying to adjust to playing that late for them. Maybe you don't rush him back. And if Iowa State gets a win against BYU, now you have Jeremiah Cooper back for Texas.
For like the important games.
The important games where Texas is probably going to have Quinn Ewers back.
Yeah.
One of probably the best. It's between him and Dylan Gabriel for best quarterback in the Big 12.
Yeah. And I've always been on like the Quinn Ewers hype train, so I might give the edge to him over Gabriel.
Yeah. And I was hating on him coming in the season. I'm not going to lie. I was looking at, I'm a big completion percentage guy, and it was not great for him. But, I
like guys that throw the ball.
Yeah.
And he throws the ball.
And he throws a good ball. That's for sure. But
it's going to be kind of interesting to see when Arch Manning comes in, too. Another guy that can throw the ball.
I think Arch Manning's probably going to transfer.
That's true. Depending on how long Quinn stays.
I mean, he'll probably stay. He'll stay
through the next year.
Yeah, he'll stay next year. And then who they got right? What's his name? Miles Murphy, I think his name is. Or
sounds right.
He's actually not bad either. He's got a pretty good arm.
But none of these guys are Arch Manning.
Yeah, none of these guys are probably one of the most highly touted prospects, especially for a family like the Mannings. But
in a long time, who's been said to be the best Manning, which is saying a lot considering the other ones are insanely good.
One of them's probably better than Tom Brady. Ooh. If you want to fall into that debate. But
that's a debate for another day.
That's a debate for another podcast. But I think
going back to the last two games.
Yeah, you're really going to want Jeremiah Cooper for that. Like I said, if I'm Matt Campbell, I'd probably play it safe and don't play Jeremiah Cooper against BYU. I mean, I'm sure Jeremiah would hate that.
Yeah. I might honestly dress him, have him on the sidelines in case they need him like later in the game, but don't like start him. Don't risk anything with him because he's obviously shown that he's like one of the best pieces on the defense.
Yeah, and I mean, I saw him on the sideline, and you could definitely, he's standing next to the walk-ons. And
you could tell in his attitude.
And I mean, when you're a 50-50 guy like that, you just don't want to rush it. Maybe he could have played.
He might have been able to play.
But let's say he gets hurt, and then you don't have your best, probably your best defensive weapon, certainly in the secondary for the last 3 games of the season. Yeah. That hurts. I will say I would have liked to see more Miles Purchase. Campbell talked about him a little bit at the end of the game. He's like, he's kind of having a little rough start to the season. It's like, that was week 9.
You got 3 games left. This isn't a start. This is the season. Especially
for a veteran like that, I think he probably could have played. I mean, he's had a shaky season for sure, but I think he probably would have played better than Thompson.
I mean, we saw Miles Purchase come in a little bit, and he looked good at times, but I mean, he also gave up a pretty long pass that led to an easy touchdown for Kansas. So I think that was even at the start of the second half there, which, I mean, from what I've seen from Miles Purchase, I'm like, oh, that's a good play he had. And then the next play, I'm like, ooh. Don't know if I would have given that up.
And most of those plays are in the backfield because he just recognizes it early. And he does do that really well, recognizing plays like wide receiver screens or, getting a TFL on a running back. But I feel like a lot of times this season when you've had to actually put him into coverage, it gets a little dicey.
Yeah. He's one of those guys that he definitely did have a slow start to the season. But now that we're 3 weeks left, I think he's one of those guys that's almost like proven himself to be good. I think this might have just maybe Campbell saw something in practice or the last few weeks where he's taken a little step back. So let's hold him out for a little bit and see if maybe, Jontez Williams can, do what he does since he has been, almost on the rise. Okay. Anyways, so, we've talked a little bit about the defense, especially with the new corners or the new safeties in there. But I think another thing that was there was a lot of, I guess, minor things, but also kind of minor things that turned into major things that impacted this game in kind of a funky way. And I know that a lot of people, especially on Twitter, are going to be talking about the Jalen Knoll kick or punt return, which...
Kick return.
Yeah. It was interesting to say the least, especially especially with Campbell's reaction after the game where he was not happy.
Yeah, I mean, from what Campbell was saying, he did not get any explanation to the refs, not to review it. Not anything. I thought, when we were up in the press box, we're so far away. I think he steps out. So I'm like, okay, that's the right call.
And we're on the other side of the field where he's running, so we can't even like see his feet too.
Yeah. So, when the refs make that call, I think that's when I'm just like, okay, people are just upset, trying to find a way to blame the refs. They're playing the ifs and buts of Cyclone football.
Yeah.
But when you look at the video,
it's pretty on the line.
That's pretty telling.
Yeah.
And that's definitely, they fumble the call there. They mark him down at the 31 when realistically he could have been marked
inside
at
the 5.
Inside the 2. Like, it's crazy.
Which, would have been an easy touchdown. And then they don't even score points off that drive, right?
This was the second quarter.
Start of the second, so no, they scored to end the half.
Nope, that was right after Kansas had their pick six.
Yep.
So then, you look at, let me look at that drive actually real quick. But yeah, it's just, that's something that, a lot of people are going to look at, and you wish that, you wish that they get something there. And it kind of almost felt like Iowa football because they're at the 31. Matt Campbell, you don't even take a chance at taking a field goal there, especially with Chase Contreras.
That was one of those things that was also brought up in the press conference was there were 2 drives there that ended in a makeable field goal spot where, Chase Contreras is good from beyond 50, and those would have been like 50-yarders. And not taking either of them, I feel like was maybe a miss on Campbell's part, especially because early in the game, they're not getting anything going. They don't have points on the board until the half. So I feel like they just needed some momentum, and Contreras would have given the momentum, but Campbell just didn't want to take the risk. I don't know if maybe he was like, Contreras was missing some in warm-ups or practice, and maybe he's like, oh, he's just kind of having an off day, and I don't want to, push him, but I don't know. It's one of those things that, you kind of want to see them get the call right.
Yeah, I'm looking at this. But and even if you don't get that call right, I'm just kind of dismissing that. Yeah. That really sucks, especially when you look at the video. That's so obvious that he doesn't go out.
Yeah, and just call it dead so it's unreviewable is a little rough. But
Matt Campbell and Jalen Noel, they can't really say anything because the NCAA is going to be on them. And Jalen was just like, someone asked him if he heard a whistle or not, and I think he said no. You got to think if you're Jalen Noel, you're running your ass off.
You're booking that.
So, and I'm looking back at this drive, and that was when Rocco got sacked. But you're on the Kansas 37.
Yeah.
You don't attempt a field goal there to be down. I know that's right there. You're still going to be down 11, but to not get on the board and Tyler Perkins punts it for a touchback, so that equals a 17-yard punt. Looking back, that actually kind of makes me mad because I didn't realize it was that bad. Not even just the call, but that drive to not even take a field goal there. But
I know. I think the call just kind of like killed all momentum for them too. So, they hadn't been driving well. So getting field position like inside the 2 would have been just a great way for them to get momentum. But then you just rip it right back out to the 35. It's like, what do you do?
Right. And I'm looking back now, and it was not scoreless at halftime. I could have sworn it was, but they get that field goal at the end. I completely forgot about. So you take the field goal early on, and then that one later in the quarter.
Yeah, and I think 14. There was one like earlier in the game too that they could have made
14-6, and then maybe let's say 14-9. Looking a lot better, but
yeah, especially when you lose by just 7.
Exactly, but of course
it was one of those things too where it was like really similar to Iowa's case, and you can be on either side of the fence for the Iowa, Cooper DeJean return touchdown where he, waved to the side, but I guess they kind of said that was a fair catch, and similar situation where they had time on the clock to score, and then they didn't. That's pretty much the same thing here. It's like, you take away what would have been a touchdown and say, okay, he's back at the 30. and then you still can't put points on the board with that.
I think it's just a little bit
curse of Iowa.
It's a little bit more infuriating because, like, with the Cooper DeJean one, you can say, like, okay, maybe they make the right call there. It just sucks because, like Noel, he takes it all the way back, not for a touchdown, but he takes it, pins him inside the 5.
Yeah.
And, you can look at the DeJean one and be like, okay, why didn't they just blow it dead then and let the play go on? But for Noel's return, it's like, okay, that is just so obvious that, and you can say the same thing about the DeJean one, but with the Noel one, it's just, okay, that is so obvious. There's no foot out of bounds. They don't even review it. At least for Cooper DeJean, they reviewed it and made, again, what you were saying, you can be on either side, but the right call, I guess. But I don't know. That's a good comparison, but
it did seem like the refs were a little whistle happy early on, especially because that wasn't the first like early blown dead call, because there was like a Caleb Bacon, I think, like stripped the ball out of whoever the Kansas running back was at the time.
That's right. And that was on Kansas's side of the field too.
Yeah, so that probably would have been a touchdown, but I can also see how yes, forward momentum was stopped for enough time for it to be blown dead. So just kind of like a weird game overall.
Yeah. And you talk about the refs being whistle heavy and just kind of making weird / wrong calls. There was at the end of the first half. It was at the end of the first half when they got that field goal. Yeah. And they make the call that, Rocco Beck's getting pressured, and I think he does hit the Kansas defender does hit the ball as Rocco is throwing it. But he throws it, and it just kind of goes off Easton Dean. You're thinking, okay, like,
an incomplete pass.
Yeah, Easton Dean dropped it. That no surprise there. But anyway, and then Jared Hufford comes out of nowhere and jumps on a Kansas player who picked up the ball, and we're kind of thinking in the press box,
why are we starting a fight now? Like, what is Jared Hufford doing?
Exactly, especially from Jared Hufford, who we've interviewed, he seems like a nice guy. He seems pretty chill, but. And then they make the call that it was a fumble recovered by Kansas, and everyone in the press, it's usually pretty quiet in there.
It's a working press box. You're not supposed to be loud at all, but that was probably the loudest I've seen the press box, as like what was pretty clearly an incomplete pass, which it was ruled that later. Yeah. Was ruled a fumble on the field.
Right. But you take they take like 4 or 5 minutes to decide this. We're looking up at the TVs, we're like, how do you call this a fumble? And I leaned over to our other sports reporter, Pavle, and I'm like, if the refs, I don't even care that it's Iowa State, but if you make this call, you're taking
at their home,
you're taking 3 points away.
Yeah, that would have ignited Jack Trice.
Yeah, and just you're looking back at the refs. You can't blame. I'm not blaming the loss on the refs. I think they just. Like you said, whistle heavy.
Iowa State beat themselves there at times. But it was just such a weird game overall.
But that's Big 12 refs in football for you. I
think there's always going to be a game like that.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say you're going to get a game from Iowa State every year, and maybe just around the Big 12 as well. This happens, but yeah, it's just very weird officiating. I'll end it. How a head coach would end it. That's all I have to say about that. So
yeah, and speaking of weird stuff, we'll introduce a new segment here on the podcast, Weird Stat of the Week, because I know looking at the stat sheet is kind of shows some random stuff that you don't really see on film. Like mine that I was looking at, I could have sworn that Eli Sanders was like a better receiving back than like Carson Hansen and Cartavius Norton, but those two actually had the same amount of receiving yards, 13.
Yeah.
Except Cartavius Norton had a long receiving yard of 15, which was weird for me to see, because I'm like, you have a 15-yard catch, but you end with 13 receiving yards.
Right.
But then you kind of look at the game and you're like, oh, okay, there's the one where Rocco threw that to you behind the line expecting to get some yards, but Kansas was on top of you.
Right.
So, it is, I don't know if it's like the weirdest stat ever, but I just thought it was interesting that both the running backs had the same amount of receiving yards.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the stat sheet, and that's just something that you're kind of scratching your head at. Like, if you don't look at the play-by-play, where I'm sure you did, you're kind of like, how do you have a long of 15, but you add up to at the end of the game for less yards?
Yeah,
it's kind of weird. My weird stat of the week, I'm gonna shout out Chase Contreras again, who right now, as we're recording this after week 9, Chase Contreras is tied for the 36th most points in the NCAA. Now, points is usually compiled of kickers and running backs, but I want to give a shout out to Chase Contreras because even though I feel like Matt Campbell and the coaching staff took 6 points away from him in that Kansas game,
possibly,
he's still got 72 points through 9 games. I mean, that's pretty impressive. And yes, you've heard it right. He's tied for 36th, but
he has half of 72, which is his total points.
So I think that personally is a little interesting to me, kind of a weird stat out there, but shout out to Chase Contreras. Me personally, I hope that Iowa State gets him back next year because he's been he's been solid. He has been really solid. I mean, we thought we had it good when Iowa State had Connor Asali, but now you're having Chase Contreras, who has been money from outside 40. So,
especially those long ones.
Which
would have come in handy against Kansas.
Neither here nor there.
I digress.
That game's over.
So we'll move on to our next segment, weekly awards. My guy, I'll give my award, the best quarterback award, goes to not Rocco Becht, goes to Jalen Knoll for his 42-yard pass, which I think I looked at the stats and that gave him a passer rating of 450 something. It was
452.8.
Yeah, which is just an insane number. But it's because he has 100% completion, has one pass for 42 yards, almost went for a touchdown, but probably the most exciting play of the game. We saw Rocco Becht flip it to Knoll, who lined up and just launched it to Higgins.
Yeah, that was very surprising for me. I kind of feel like we see a couple, trick plays like that from Nate Scheelhaas, which is awesome. And I'm not saying you need to have one every other drive, but it was definitely really cool to see. Jalen Knoll just comes out there, and who knew he had an arm like that to just sail it.
Spiral on it too.
Yeah. Who was the one? Was it not last year, but the year before? Who threw it to Xavier Hutchinson on that trick? Was that Charlie Kohler that threw that ball, or is that what play I'm talking about? It was a trick play at home to Xavier Hutchinson, very similar. I want to say actually it might have been X to either Easton Dean or Charlie Kohler,
one of the tight ends.
Yeah, that's neither here nor there. But
they love throwing with their receivers.
Yeah, but who knew that Jalen Knoll again? Who knew he had an arm like that? Maybe we might put him in Wildcat a couple times. We'll see what happens.
See what he can do with the ball.
But my a weekly award. I'm reviving my there's that guy award, and it's going out to Dimitri Stanley, who actually led the team in receiving yards with 59, and that's the most receiving yards that he has had. I want to say, I have it here.
Season.
It's the most he's had all season, and his most since October 29th of last season against Oklahoma.
So over a year.
Yeah, where he had 90 receiving yards against them. And it kind of sucks because he was a guy that I was looking forward to coming into the season. I would think that Rocco Becht would have looked at him more, considering this is his 6th year in collegiate football. I kind of thought that he would be someone that stands out, but 14 catches on 126 yards this year. So
he also co-led the team in receptions too, which was pretty cool to see. I think we kind of expected more out of Nolan Higgins because they have been those top two guys. But it was kind of interesting to see somebody else take over that top spot.
Yeah, and I'm looking at it now, actually, that Rocco had 3 receivers, Knoll, Stanley, and Higgins, with over 50 yards. Yeah. So that was kind of surprising. I mean, I knew he spread the ball out, but it's not kind of like the last couple games where Higgins popped off in the Cincinnati game, and then Jalen Knoll popped off in the Oklahoma State game. I don't know. My hey, there's that guy award goes to Dimitri Stanley, who hopefully I don't have to give it to him again in the last game of the season after doing nothing in these next two. But we'll have to see what happens in Provo this weekend, which we can start previewing right now.
When looking at BYU, the biggest thing that sticks out to me is that this is probably the most winnable game Iowa State has maybe in the last 5 weeks, because BYU, obviously the newcomers, we all know this, have been struggling this year. BYU is a team that, yes, they haven't lost at home yet this season. And yes, they were the only new school that had a win against a Big 12 team as they beat Texas Tech at home.
Yeah.
But they're also a team that has kind of had their own struggles in a way, because, I mean, you look at just looking at the Big 12 stats, they are bottom of the league in offense.
Right.
You know, obviously Iowa State is just one above them, but still bottom of the league in offense and not great in defense. So, I mean, this is just one of those games where Iowa State's defense is probably going to do really well. They're probably going to eat. And Iowa State's offense has a good chance to have maybe a bounce back game against them. So this is one of those that is almost like on paper. I don't want to pencil in a win because we saw what happened against Ohio, but this should be a game where they need to come out and they need to win this, especially if they want to make a bowl game.
And it's a fair comparison to compare this game to Ohio, but honestly, I think this Cyclones team is, one, they're hungry for that bowl game. They want to make up for Kansas, which I think a lot of the players, a lot of the players and Matt Campbell kind of want to shrug off because I think they knew that was a very winnable game for them. But yeah, the quarterback stats very similar, running back stats very similar, and receivers also very similar in terms of who's been that guy for both teams. But yeah, I think this will be a tough matchup for Iowa State solely because it's another conference road matchup, and I know that they've won their last two. But I see this being pretty similar to the BYU game where like you said, the BYU game. Not the BYU game, the Baylor game.
Yes.
Both B schools and bad at football. I'm just kidding. But
joking.
I think it'll be pretty comparable to the Baylor game because the defense, like you said, they're gonna pop off. They might get a couple picks here and there or turnovers, whatever the case may be, and then Iowa State will get back to scoring 30 points against conference opponents. Maybe it sounds like a broken record. It's a very used term, but a get right game, get back on track game,
especially for the defense, because the game against Kansas was it was just a rough showing from the defense overall. They let up too many big plays. You highlight the 80-yard touchdown that pretty much just put the cap on the game. They want to come out and just show everybody that they are an elite defense, like they have been at times throughout the season, like they were last year. And this is the game where they need to show that, because BYU has not been great on offense.
Right.
And if you're going up against the bottom offense in the league, the defense has to be on point. And
you're also going up against one of the worst defenses in the league, a defense that has allowed over 450 yards per game, when Iowa State is still sitting at that second best in the league against conference opponents with 368.5 yards per game. And then also, you've highlighted that offense. Another good stat to look at is that in their last 5 games, BYU has scored 7, 6, 27, 11, and then that shootout in Cincinnati, but
it is Cincinnati.
So, but those two big games stand out to me where, yes, West Virginia is good. Texas, obviously very good, but you can only score 2 field goals against Texas and a touchdown against West Virginia, both on the road. I know that, but I mean, if you want to play in this league, you gotta do better than that.
And I do see West Virginia being one of those, a similar school to Iowa State in a way that they've found success.
Yeah.
I think, they're West Virginia's 6-3.
Yeah.
Iowa State's 5-4. So
one of those non-conference games turns around maybe against Ohio or maybe even against Iowa.
You're looking at the same record.
Yeah.
And I think, obviously BYU had to go on the road to West Virginia, but I I still don't think that BYU has maybe the firepower to get over Iowa State's offense or defense.
Exactly. Yeah, I don't think they do. And I think their defense is going to, if anything in sports, especially in football, you got to look at the patterns. Iowa State has had a traditionally good defense this season. I think they bounce back. BYU traditionally not great offense, and they haven't been able to benefit from their defense as much as Iowa State has. Again, I just keep looking at the Baylor game. I see a lot of similarities here. You could even point back to the Cincinnati game, and I think you could see a lot of similarities in this game looking forward or looking ahead at it. The line is open right now at 6.5 for Iowa State. I mean, opening up as favors on the road. That's got to be a little uplifting if you're Iowa State. But I just think this is a major turnaround game. You clinch a bowl eligibility spot, and then you just look ahead towards Texas.
And then those last two games are like not as important as if you lose this game, you have to win one of the last two.
Yeah.
And that puts a lot of pressure on the team.
And looking ahead at the last two games, I think there's a good chance if I want to rank it, Iowa State going 2-0 against Texas and Kansas is probably least probable. Getting a win against Texas or Kansas State, that is probably at number one for me, and I don't think that they drop both games. I think that they split those two games, and I hate to look past BYU, but, it almost just really does seem like this is a game that Iowa State is supposed to win against the Cougars, but, it would be it's probably going to be their first matchup ever, kind of just like Cincinnati. I can confirm that real quick if you want to preview BYU a little bit more.
And
but
I think a lot of people are going to talk about, they definitely talked about at the press conference that BYU has success at home. They haven't lost this season at home. But, you look at their wins at home. They beat Sam Houston. They beat Southern Utah. And they beat Cincinnati. I think their best win of the season came against Arkansas, but that was before the Big 12 season even started.
Right.
And at this point, they've been eaten alive so much in the Big 12 season that I don't know if they even have the firepower left to, make a last-ditch effort. Because, at this point, they've lost their last two games. They've let up over 35 points, and they've scored less or 7 or less in the last two. So, their best game in recent weeks came against Texas Tech at home.
Yeah.
But Texas Tech is also one of those teams that isn't necessarily like a top team in the Big 12.
And if I'm correct, I want to look at it. It was, I wouldn't call it a shootout, but 27-14, like you said, for Texas Tech. Texas Tech is 3-3 in the conference. They're not exactly, it's not like they beat if they would have beat West Virginia like that,
Oklahoma.
Yeah, or an Oklahoma, or even like a I don't know, maybe like a TCU. If they beat them like that, that's maybe a little different.
And they lost to TCU. Of course, it was on the road at TCU,
but
they lost by 33, which Iowa State did beat TCU.
And looking at this, the Register has it that BYU and Iowa State, just for historic matters, they've met 4 times, and the last time was 50 years ago. So that's crazy, to me at least.
Yeah.
Who would have known 50 years ago that they would be joining the Big 12 Conference?
That's true.
I think, this should be, I said it, could take a shot every time I've said this about an Iowa State game, but it'll be an interesting matchup.
Oh, yeah.
9:15 in Provo. You got to love to see it. I think, I'm going to, early predictions, I'm a homer, but I'll take Iowa State on this one. I really do think that they turn things around. Looking at how BYU has played this year, had one of the worst defenses, had one of the worst offenses, have not been able to benefit from their defense as much as Iowa State has. Iowa State gets back on track, moves to 6-4, 5-2 in the conference after this game.
Yes.
If they win.
Yep. 5 wins in the conference.
Yeah. And if you're Matt Campbell and the Cyclones, you got to take that as a win. Even if you lose these next 2 games to completely turn around after going 1-8 in the conference, and have all the allegations and people leaving the team.
Yeah, just to make a bowl game is just saying a lot for this team.
Make a bowl game, have a positive record in the conference at the end of the year, return people going into next year. I know I'm looking a little far ahead, but just thinking big picture for the Cyclones. We can dwell on the Kansas game, but overall, this has still been a really good season. They've had some blunders, talking about Ohio, winnable games like Kansas, but overall, I think they've set themselves up for a good future for the next year or two at least.
Yeah, and I expect them to come out and probably put up over 30 on BYU.
Yeah.
I think they should win by a healthy amount. They're like, this isn't a game that I'm going to overthink. I'm going to go with Iowa State because that's what my gut's telling me, and my gut has been kind of right in staff picks, but I've gone against it with not better judgment. So my gut's telling me that Iowa State's going to go in there and just, do what they do best, or what they've done best on the road in the Big 12, and just get wins against opponents that they should, just to make a bowl game. And then going into those last two games without the pressure on, I think they do have a chance to split those games. I think they're both at the same time winnable and not winnable. Two really tough opponents.
Yep.
But they are also schools that have given up losses. And I think Iowa State is in good situations in both of them to, come out with a win. So I do think the last 3 weeks will be interesting to see, and it will definitely be a good way for Matt Campbell to end this season, which has been a pretty good season to say the least.
Yeah. And, looking ahead at Texas, under the lights at Jack Trice, final home game of the season at 7 o'clock. Got to be thinking the black jerseys again.
Although they haven't played well in the black jersey.
They kind of lost their mojo a little bit, but it's Iowa State. We know they're going to pull out the black jerseys for a night game.
Yeah.
Or maybe switch things up and, pull out a little red, white, red. One of my favorite combos, but we'll just have to see.
Yeah. Anyways, all there is left is just to wait for the game to come and see what happens. Iowa State's going to take on BYU Saturday in hopes of making a bowl game. So thanks for watching, and tune in next week.